Hi, recap reporters here. Today I'm going to explain a movie called Holes. Spoilers ahead, you have been warned. The film begins with a group of young people dressed in jail uniforms laboring in the hot sun. A young child named Barbag intentionally gets bitten by a snake in order to avoid hard labor. The scene then switches to a boy named Stanley Yelnats going down the street. A pair of sneakers lands on his head and knocks him down. He decides to keep the shoes because his eccentric family is currently working on a solution for smelling shoes. But, on his way back home, he is arrested by police on suspicion of stealing the shoes. They were discovered to be the property of a prominent basketball player named Clyde Livingston, who had donated them to charity. The cops transport the youngster home and notify his family of the occurrence. The Stanleys, on the other hand, are unsurprised and blame the misfortune on a family curse. Stanley is subsequently brought before the judge, who sentences him to months of incarceration at Camp Green Lake, a juvenile detention camp. He is introduced to the in charge, Mr. Sir, there. Mr. Sir is a very severe person, and he cautions Stanley that there is no use in running away from the camp due to the lack of water for miles. He also mentions the region's venomous reptiles, which have supposedly killed a large number of people. Stanley is then handed his uniform and instructed to dig feet deep and feet in diameter every day in order to develop character. Although he is not meant to look for anything specific, if he finds something noteworthy, he may be granted a day off. In the following scenario, Dr. Podansky introduces Stanley to a gang of boys known as X-Ray, Armpit, Squid, Zigzag, Magnet, and Zero. Because he is the youngest, Zero is always silent. After being transported to the hospital earlier, Stanley replaces Barfbag on the squad. Zero breaks his silence for the first time over lunch, when Stanley discloses that he was wrongfully suspected of taking Livingston's trainers, stunning everyone. A flashback then shows that Stanley's great-grandpa Stanley I amassed a fortune in the stock market before being robbed by a woman named Kissing Kate Barlow one day. This puts him in a state of shock, and he goes bankrupt in a matter of months, having no other option. Stanley I begins working on a European farm, where he falls in love with the daughter of his boss. He seeks counsel from Madame Zeroni, the local fate teller, on how to win the girl's heart. Zeroni, on the other hand, tells him that the girl is a fool and that he should instead immigrate to the United States. Stanley I considers it, but in the end, he disregards the advice and goes to ask the girl for her hand in marriage. However, the girl's father tells him that if he wants to marry his daughter, he must provide a large fat pig as a dowry. Stanley I returns to Zeroni, and she hands him a piglet, instructing him to carry it up the mountain and force it to drink from a nourishing natural stream. Stanley I agrees and promises to pay a visit to Zeroni after he succeeds. In addition, he pledges to transport the fragile old woman up the mountain so she might regain her strength and youth. The pig eventually develops in size, and Stanley I transports it to the girl's father. Yet, as Zeroni predicted, the girl proves to be extremely dumb. She is now torn between Stanley and another ordinary-looking man. Stanley I, disappointed, decides to take Zeroni's original recommendation and travel to America. But, he entirely forgets to uphold his commitment to her in the process. This enrages the fate teller to the point where she curses his entire male family for eternity. Back in the present, Stanley adjusts to life in the camp. One day, he discovers a fossil and exhibits it to the counselor, Dr. Podansky, in the hopes of obtaining time off. The counselor, though, informs him that the warden is uninterested in fossils. He also claims that there used to be a lake here and that the warden's grandfather owned the entire area around it. The film then leaps forward to a century ago, when the warden's grandfather governed the town. Sam, a man, is seen selling onions. He has a thing for a local teacher named Catherine, so he gives her a free sack of onions. In exchange, she gives him a jar of peaches that she gathered herself. In the present, Stanley defeats X-Ray and others, and they accept him into their team, dubbing him Caveman. This is due to his ability to locate fossils. He receives a letter from his mother one afternoon and smiles as he reads her stories. Soon after, Zero enters and asks what he's laughing about, revealing that he can't read. He then asks Stanley to teach him. He declines to teach him to read since he is fatigued after digging all day. Stanley discovers an object resembling a shell casing with the initials KB. One day, sadly, X-Ray takes it from him and provides it to the counselor for him to receive the day off. The counselor then informs the camp warden, who turns out to be a woman, of the discovery. Delighted by the object, she rewards X-ray and instructs everyone to dig further into his trench. The film then leaps back several years. Sam visits Miss Catherine and proposes to repair her leaking roof in exchange for 3 jars of her spicy peaches. Catherine agrees, and the two become closer over time. Other guys in town, though, begin to express interest in her. A man named C hits on Catherine one night, but she ruthlessly ignores him. Weeks pass, and Sam eventually finishes her repair work, but the two continue to hang out. He musters the bravery to kiss her one day. Sadly, Trout Walker notices this and, enraged, burns down Catherine's school. When the latter learns about this, she goes to the local sheriff for assistance, but even he tries to kiss her. He also informs Catherine that her black partner will be sentenced to death for the crime of kissing a white lady. She runs to tell Sam, but it is too late since he is shot in his boat. Catherine is taken aback by this and tries to avenge her lover's death. A few days later, she murders the sheriff and finally kisses him before fleeing. Catherine never looks back after that, and her journey as an outlaw starts. She then proceeds to rob affluent merchants and landowners before murdering them and kissing them goodbye. Kissing Kate Barlow is her nickname as a result of this. Meanwhile, following Sam's execution, the town never rains again, and the lake ultimately dries up, making Trout Walker's land useless. In the present, Magnet takes a sack of seed from Mr. Sir when he brings the boys water. Mr. Sir, on the other hand, notices the missing bag and threatens to punish everyone. When no one else steps forward, Stanley resolves to take the fall in order to save everyone else. Mr. Sir takes him to the warden in the hopes of having him punished for the theft. The warden, on the other hand, chastises Mr. Sir for distracting the kid from his work. Zero digs his grave to thank Stanley for saving everyone when he returns to the field. Stanley, moved by the gesture, promises to teach him to read and write. During their conversation, Stanley realizes that the shell casing he discovered earlier was actually a tube of lipstick. Kate Barlow was the proud owner of it. At the same moment, Zero reveals his true identity as Hector Zeroni. The boy is related to Madame Zeroni, who cursed the Stanley family years ago. One day, the boss discovers that Stanley makes Zero dig his grave holes. He scolds both of them for being ineffective, and upon hearing this, Zero grows upset and slaps the man with a shovel before fleeing the camp. The warden and other camp officials later discuss Zero's escape. Because Zero is an orphan, they believe he will not live more than a week. It is revealed that his mother abandoned him in a park and never returned. Stanley overhears the exchange, which irritates him greatly. Later that evening, he recounts his great-grandfather Stanley Yelnats IV's surviving days in the desert after his wagon was robbed by Kate Barlow. Stanley, I survived thanks to a place called God's Finger. No one knows where it is because when Stanley I was finally located, he had gone insane. The next day, Stanley resolves to flee to save his companion Zero. He finally discovers Zero asleep under an old abandoned boat after wandering for hours in the desert. The latter reveals that he lived thanks to the jars of peaches he discovered aboard the boat. The yacht obviously belongs to the late Sam. The guys then spot a mountain in the distance that resembles a human thumb. When Stanley looks at it closely, it occurs to him that the mountain is God's finger. The guys begin climbing the mountain, hoping to locate something, but Zero becomes exhausted and is unable to walk any further. Stanley refuses to give up on Zero and carries him up the mountain on his back. By bearing her great-grandson, he unintentionally fulfills his great vow of grandfather to Madame Zeroni. They find the creek once they reach the top of the mountain. They also find the onions Sam grew near the water. Meanwhile, Stanley's father discovers a treatment for stinky shoes made of peaches and onions. Stanley is likewise found to be innocent, and his family's attorney arrives at the camp to collect him. The warden, on the other hand, withholds information concerning Stanley's escape. The next day, Zero wakes up and admits that Stanley wound up at the camp because of him. Zero, it turns out, accidentally took the sneakers from the charity auction, and when he saw the cops hunting for them, he panicked and flung them down a bridge. Stanley's bad luck caused the sneakers to land on top of him. Hearing this, the latter is impressed. He is surprised, but not upset. Instead, he is thankful for finding God's thumb. The film returns to the past once more. Kate Barlow eventually locates Sam's boat in the dried-up lake, which is now turned into a desert. Trout Walker and his wife come at the scene as she sits alone, recalling her late lover. They demand to know where Kate has hidden all her stolen goods because they are in desperate need of money after losing everything due to the drought. Kate refuses to assist them and instead does the unimaginable by allowing a yellow-spotted lizard bites herself. Trout Walker's successors, including the present warden, have been digging through the dried lake in quest of Kate's riches ever since. Back in the present, Stanley and Zero return to the field in search of the treasure trove where he first discovered Kate's lipstick tube. They eventually succeed, but the warden and Mr. Sir arrive and attempt to grab the trunk. They swiftly retreat, however, as they observe the yellow-spotted lizards climbing atop the lads. The warden is still waiting for the lizards to go the next morning. That she is capable of stealing the chest. The guys are alive, it turns out, because the lizards dislike the onions they've been eating. After some time, Stanley's attorney arrives, as do the cops. The warden accuses the lads of stealing her trunk, but Zero swiftly dismisses her claims when he discovers Stanley Yelnats written on the trunk. As a result, Stanley is permitted to leave with the trunk while the warden and her thugs are apprehended. It also rains for the first time in 100 years in the desert. Later, the boys go to Stanley's house, where they divide the treasure equally. With his newfound fortune, Zero hires a private investigator to find his mother, and it is revealed that she, too, has been hunting for him all along. The film concludes with the lads becoming neighbors and inviting all of the released camp youngsters to visit. If you enjoyed the video, please like it and subscribe to the channel to see more similar movie recaps.